Ladies and gentlemen, please find your friends and help them find their seats. It's not you that can't find your seat, it's your friend. Moving into a conversation about industrial supply chain and distribution and deterring vulnerabilities, we have our next panelist moderator, Major General retired Edward Dorman. Major General Edward Dorman, Executive Vice President and COO of S10 Consulting, coordinates service delivery to U.S. defense and government customers.
He's a has-been that still cares. How's that? I'm a Army HQE, and I'm glad to be with the Marine and Naval forces here. And the few, the proud, they're not kidding, huh? But you guys must be the really proud to stay here on the last day, as was said.
I had flies. I had strongman winning competition in here. I had a few more things.
I'm sure you did. Knucklehead has a capital K and a capital N.
Give him a round of applause.
All right. So welcome to the follow-up panel to the one Colonel Marotto and his esteemed panelists just had. I think this one builds well on top of that. And so we're going to run this as a thinking discussion here, and we would love for your input as well. And so thanks for being here. It's about industrial supply chain and distribution or deterring vulnerabilities. And I think that when you talk about the industrial supply chain, you can't do that without talking about the National Defense Industrial Strategy, because, and then, distribution, you have to talk about some other things. So when we think about that, what's our objective? It could be, as the previous panel said, no more starving Brits in the Crimea, but I don't really think that's what it's about. I think we need to think about what our strategy documents try to achieve. And so the NDIS that came out in 2023 says, hey, there's 4 critical areas: resilient supply chains, workforce readiness, flexible acquisition, and economic deterrence. And I think that last one is key for what we're going to talk about, because it is a global, hyper-connected, interdependent, complex supply chain that has both industrial components and distribution components to deliver what's required, where it's required, when it's required, to whom it's required, right? And so I think it complements the regional sustainment framework. So really, today, that's what we want to talk about. As I said, there's a 2023 released industrial strategy, National Industrial Strategy. It's the first one of its kind. If you haven't read it, I would encourage you to read it. Then, how many people follow War on the Rocks here? I think I've heard it in every panel and so forth. So I would just highlight a podcast that came out called Can Congress Revive Shipbuilding and Maritime Strategy? And it was a discussion with Senator Kelly out of Arizona and Congressman Waltz out of Florida, where they provide their bipartisan congressional recommendations report for maritime strategy. And it had some points that they laid out in a letter to the POTUS, right? It said, 1, establish an interagency maritime policy coordinator, sort of a czar, I suppose. Like, we need another one of those, reporting to POTUS. With the rank and authorities commensurate to sync national maritime policy and influence. The defense industrial base resourcing decisions across the civil, military, and commercial dimensions, right? Number 2, it said, issue a POTUS determination that establishes commercial, civil, military, shipbuilding, and shipbuilding industries with associated workforces and infrastructure, and leverage the Defense Production Act Title III to invest. And then number 3, develop a national strategy founded on de-risking U.S. maritime domain from the People's Republic of China and other asymmetric threats, right? And so past panel, we talked about the champions of contested logistics, the cartels, and other asymmetric threats. We need to think about that across the emerging maritime environment. So we have 5 panelists today, 4 live, 1 virtual, and I'll go ahead and take a moment to introduce them. Colonel Eric Penrod, out of NAV Sup in Mechanicsburg, a future plans and naval logistics integrator. He has 27 years in the Marine Corps. He began his career as a combat engineer officer where he commanded Marines up to battalion level, and as a colonel logistics officer, he is commanded at the regimental level. He currently serves as the Plans and Naval Logistics Integration Officer for Naval Supply Systems Command, or NAVSUP, in Mechanicsburg, where he's working to ensure the NAVSUP enterprise is ready to support global op plans, and also serving as a key connector between NAVSUP and Marine Corps logistics leaders and key offices. Colonel Jason Kalin, who's our virtual guest. You can tell by his picture. He works at DLA. He's trying to remain anonymous. No. Jason is an Air Force account manager there at DLA. He's a 24-year veteran of the Air Force and has logistics experience both in retail and wholesale supply chains at the squadron, wing, air, logistics complex, center, and agency levels, and is currently serving as the DLA Air Force account manager at Fort Belvoir. In this capacity, he leads a team of military and civilian logisticians to coordinate and integrate with Air Force senior leadership, the air staff, major commands, and operational units to assess and improve DLA's support to the service. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Radigan, liaison to NPS and USSF SSC Marine Innovation Unit. Lieutenant Colonel Radigan is the Marine Corps Warfighting Labs liaison to the Naval Postgraduate School and U.S. Space Force's Space Systems Command. So now that I've taken care of the acronyms there, you can never have too many. And so over the past year and a half, he's been in the uniform lead at Naval Postgraduate School's Consortium for Advanced Manufacturing Research and Education, or CAMRE, and completed many firsts for the DoD, including 3D printing in flight and executing the largest distributed advanced manufacturing demonstration the department has done to date. His knowledge on how to operationalize advanced manufacturing in conflict has been instrumental to shaping both policy and tactics, techniques, and procedures. Mr. Eric Schnell of Craitor. He's the founder and he's the founder of Craitor. He first began working with the Marine Corps in 3D printing 7 years ago as a strategic technical advisor to elements aboard Camp Pendleton. As an advisor, he supported process development and training, part identification, reverse engineering, machine adaptation for deployed usage. It is from this work that the concept of Craitor was born. At Craitor, Eric and his team have been embedded with the Marine Corps for 4 years through a cooperative research and development agreement focusing on developing advanced manufacturing solutions for every climb and place, enabling manufacturing of critical parts at the point of need at the extreme ends of the world's most important supply chains. And last but not least, we want to save the real technical expert, a chief warrant officer. That's the way we look at them in the Army, and I'm sure you do in the Marine Corps. CW3 Matt Pine, who's the Advanced Manufacturing Integration Lead for 2nd Maintenance Battalion, 2nd Marine Logistics Group, Camp Pendleton. I'm sorry, Camp Lejeune.
Yes.
Since about a week ago. So he recently transferred in. So that's our panelists today. So the first question I'm going to ask is each panelist, and we'll just start with you, Colonel Radigan, and briefly provide your perspective on the biggest vulnerabilities in the current industrial supply chain and distribution network.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for having me. While not a logistician by trade, I think if there's any pilots in the room, we're constantly thinking about where's the next fuel coming from, where's the next rocket coming from, who's got the best food, who's got the best hotels, all the important things to operations.
You're sure you're not in the Air Force?
The biggest risk that I see out there is really just personnel and talent. And what I mean by that is having the right skill sets here domestically in the U.S. Now that includes things like having enough machinists and welders and all those technical skills that you need to actually build the equipment that's necessary to win a battle. So that's my biggest concern right now. I think we're making some good strides, and the Department of Defense has done some great investments to create the schoolhouses that are putting out these skill sets. But that's my biggest concern right now, is having the right talent and people in place.
All right, I'll go next. Again, thanks for having me here this morning. As you heard earlier, I came up as a combat engineer in the Marine Corps, so as a Marine sitting in a Navy organization that's not a supply Marine, I'm continuously learning, but I'll try to give my perspective from the NAVSUP seat that I'm here to represent this week in my conversations and my perspectives this morning. But so I would think that the biggest concern or vulnerability from that perspective is really the way that Navy, talk about Navy ships, the shipbuilding process, how really very few ships are alike. It's not like a Humvee where every part is the same across the board coming off of a factory line. Everything's different. So once the parts that are provided to the Navy are utilized and used up, that supply line, that production line is no longer effective. So that's a very difficult piece that I observe NAVSUP having to deal with all the time, that once those parts and the Class 9 block is utilized, then having to go back to either additive manufacturing or to the original manufacturer to try to get those production lines going again. So that's a big concern from that perspective. And secondarily, I think Lieutenant Colonel Wu in the last panel kind of stole some of my thoughts in terms of determination of what to put in forward locations and where to put it. I think is a secondary big concern and vulnerability that I see NAVSUP struggling with all the time, especially when you consider a lot of places will probably be smoking holes at some point. So where do we get those forward position items for the fight? But that's all I have.
When it comes to the greatest vulnerability, I think both of those are really key issues that we're facing. But from the industrial side, I think part of the big issues is mindset and overall strategy that we've implemented over the last few decades. And that is, in the industrial base, we've focused heavily on not being prepared for the next conflict, but saving the next dollar. And so a lot of the systems and incentives have been built in a way in which if we need to mobilize the organic industrial base, there will be a delay in that process. And that's what I think is the biggest issue that we face right now, is that if we were to go into conflict tomorrow, the business systems, the models, heck, even down to the money and how it flows, is not set in a way that enables the organic industrial base to stand up and be able to support our warfighters how they really could and really need to be.
So I would challenge the word industrial base, especially when we start talking DoD. We no longer have an industrial base. 30 years ago, we had over 50 prime contractors. We now have an industrial pillar with 5 to 6 key contractors. We have killed the competition. We have killed the American ability to produce things. We've become a nation of consumers, not producers. And we have to revitalize that using everything that has been talked about up here already.
And Colonel Jason Kalin over at DLA for your thoughts, right quick.
Hey, good morning. Hopefully you can hear me.
Check, can hear you well.
Okay, great. All right, great. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here today on the panel. I know I'm virtual, but I'll be able to do that. I think our biggest vulnerabilities in kind of listening to the other panelists, I'm gonna share 5 total really quick, but I think it really gets at what the panelists were already kind of talking about. But the first one is inconsistent appropriations and uncertainty on government spending. I know we've had at least 20 years of CRs, the Budget Control Act, all of that to disrupt our planning and delays. And I think there's a lot to say about that when it comes to inconsistent appropriations. Number 2 would be the decline in U.S. manufacturing base capabilities and capacity, where we've had a big gap in the workforce. I mean, about 7 million manufacturing jobs have gone away over the past several years. Number 3 would be the challenge of working with the U.S. government business and procurement. And what I mean by that is long acquisition processes, security clearances. I've seen all that as I've worked with industry. Number 4 would be our industrial policies with competitor nations, and in particular China. where over the years, if you were to see a diagram from the 1980s to today, you would see our trading partners have been overcome with China. The other one that isn't talked about much is the Belt and Road Initiative. Which actually over the years has now become global, and obviously a vulnerability for us in the industrial base and the supply chain. And then the last, to kind of getting at what some of the other panelists had said, diminishing human capital, STEM degrees, trade skills, all of those have all been diminished over the years. A lot of that is change in society for the United States. But I see that as a big vulnerability going forward, especially that diminishing human capital when I was at the depots. So those are my vulnerabilities this morning. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Colonel Kalin. That's great. So when we look at that, that really affects our ability of all the things that you've kind of laid out here when we talk about vulnerabilities. We talked a little bit about distribution. Eric, you talked about that from the ship standpoint, right? And running out of parts for our distribution assets. Of course, we've got rail, surface, sea, which is also surface, air, so we've got a number of ways to do distribution, but I didn't hear us talk much about the vulnerabilities there. But we did talk about the industrial base and our global supply chain. And I think my first question would then go, really kind of talking to integration and innovation, right? So we say, so I would ask Eric Schnell, you talked about industry, and that's going to be the baseline, right? Chief Pine also said there is no real industrial base. There's a West Virginia family tree, essentially of 5 big primes, and there's a lot of great innovators out there, small businesses that would like to get in, but they're held at length, right? So we've got to help industry come closer together. But you said something that's very, very interesting. We were focused on effectiveness on efficiency versus effectiveness, right? Now we have to be effective. So it's not about saving dollars, although that's very important. We have to be smarter about that. So how is Craitor's work in 3D printing and advanced manufacturing, additive manufacturing, addressing some of the vulnerabilities? Because when I look at it, I hear the buzzword, we're modernizing across the defense industrial base, but I submit that if you can't produce at scale and speed of the requirement, you're not really modernizing, you're managing, and you're kind of doing product improvement. So could you talk to us a little bit about, from an industry standpoint, some specific examples of where technology is enhancing the supply chain resilience, and then how you deal with distribution setbacks, if you do?
Absolutely. Yeah, so I come from a little bit of a unique viewpoint, right? As originally we were a startup. We founded around an idea. We've kind of gone from the beginning to the end and bootstrapped our way to where we're at today. And unfortunately, when it comes to DoD innovation and big companies that spin out and startups, the most successful ones you hear about are all run by like billionaires that had their previous business and now they're interested in DoD, or they're highly backed by a lot of venture capital. And so innovation is really struggled to really take place in the DoD because it's cash intensive, complicated, and has a lot of really threatening languages that gets real scary when you have no idea what you're doing and kind of going into the first time and motivated in that sense. So there's a lot of innovation that is held back generally by the processes that are in place that have led to 5 big companies in this space. So as far as just getting into the playing field when it comes to enabling innovation for the supply chain, we're stuck at stage 0 when it comes to a lot of capabilities to help solve that. We've been lucky in this regard, having such a close relationship with our partners in the Marine Corps, the Army, the Navy, in which we've been able to kind of take advantage of that to punch above our weight a little bit when it comes to innovation. And that has taken the form of, at the moment right now, expeditionary 3D printing and point-of-need manufacturing. So our focus to the kind of core piece there when it comes to supply chain is both technology and existence base, I guess I would say. Because for us, as a technology, point of need manufacturing, 3D printing is relatively self-explanatory in which it can have an impact on supply chain. But when it comes to what it means overall for innovation to be able to be in place, that's where I think that supply, logistics, and the overall innovation entering the from the organic industrial base into the space is an issue, is where the transition is a problem.
So for you or other panelists here, since you are working closely with the Marine Corps, what can we do to overcome that? Because in your lane in additive manufacturing, right, 3D printing as an example, it's got to be in a lot of different places. We have to ensure redundancy of the types of printers and what can print where, and the stock or the, you know, the filaments that you're actually printing from. So what are we collectively doing, right? Not just to provide the supply, but the transport. And we're talking about this in terms of logistics function, but we really also need to begin to think about the sustainment function, because the sustainment function also has that financial degree to it as well. That is key and essential. How are we leveraging those things to kind of overcome these challenges, to ensure we can have distribution to the place that it is needed?
So far, the Marine Corps has actually, I would say, been one of the best partners in that. The only way that, as I described, punch above our weight, the only way that we've been able to do what we do so far is by how flexible the Marine Corps has been at accepting innovation and championing it, providing resources, locations, testing. I mean, we've been lucky enough that I can ring up a random unit that I've never talked before, have no introduction, say, hey, can I come out there for a week, learn about your problems, see how this works, and then learn from you. And almost always I get a yes. And that is not the case across all the different services. And where there is a little bit more of a difficulty is when it comes to kind of the, let's be frank, the capital side, when it comes to budget on that front. But the Marine Corps absolutely makes up for it when it comes to flexibility, adaptation, and willingness to support that. So that's how we've been able to get up into this point. The next steps and kind of where the Marine Corps and just generally the DoD might be able to make an impact is the kind of the middle ground. So like for us, we have essentially what amounts to a product at very low volume production that comes with a lot of costs and burdens, especially making it to the way that the Marine Corps is asked. And from there, the next step is essentially program. That's really difficult for a small business to be able to make that transition, right, in a way the DoD would want that innovation, right? They don't want to invest in a capability in which there's only 5 or 6 of them around and then ask to buy 500 of them, right? So where there's a little bit of a gap there and where I think that I honestly don't know the answer, but where there could be room to provide support when it comes to transitioning capabilities like ours. It is in that's kind of onesies and twosies kind of medium scale up into kind of a larger scale kind of support there.
Chief, what are your thoughts on that? Because to me, you know, General Berger had a lot of great comments yesterday about we got to do both simultaneously. We got to have programs of record, although I wonder if that's not a third industrial age process laid on a fifth industrial age time period, right? And so we may have to do a little bit of both, right? But we also got to rapidly, as I said, produce. That's the true definition of modernization in my mind. Scale at speed. So what are your thoughts from the line and actually doing it?
So the Marine Corps spent probably $50 million just testing. Like, hey, here's all these capabilities, the money came, let's test them. So we sent a lot of stuff out. Not a lot of it worked. It did a job, but it didn't do the job. So a lot of that money, we like to think it's sunk cost, like the ROI is terrible, but the human capital we gain from that and the experience that we gain from that is the reason now that we have actual programs of record getting pushed out, and with a tech refresh every 3 years, because the programs are developing so quickly that the program office understood from the start, hey, we're fielding this, but by the time it even gets finally fielded, there's already going to be better technology, and it's already going to be further ahead. So they were very forward thinking in that, and we've been very lucky in that aspect, and I think it will continue to grow because of that and not just become paperweights.
So I guess a follow-up question, if we're going to be more joint than we've ever been, the new normal, the new operating environment requires us to do that. Will we have enough capacity so that, if you look at sustaining a force, the Army has a congressionally directed common user logistics function and some, directed functions in watercraft, in fuels and ammunition and things like that. But, it's going to come to a time and place where we're not going to have everything postured exactly where we need it. So we're going to have to leverage one another's capacities in the interim for transitionary time periods until other capability arrives, right? I think the burden of escalation and future potential conflict is going to rest with the U.S. It's not going to rest with our adversaries. And so our logistics, if I look at the Army, 80% is in the reserve component, right? The Army National Guard and the reserves, heavily in the reserves. So what's the capacity there, and how is that feeding into the supply chain in theaters where we need it all the way back to the strategic base? I would ask any of the panelists, and Jason, you to weigh in on that, because it's a combination of a supply chain vulnerability and a problem set linked to allies and partners, and it is about distribution. So how could we talk about that a little bit?
I would say from a NAVSOP perspective, I saw a study or a project that NAVSOP was doing, looking at the required parts for a particular carrier strike group capability. And even though a lot of the focus was internal on NAVSOP's ability to provide those Class 9 parts, really the preponderance is provided by DLA. So as much as as a service, they try to take on things on their own. We're very heavily reliant upon Jason and his team over there at DLA. So I would offer that a lot of things start with them and then it matriculates down to the services to really see where we can make sure we're picking up that role. That being said, no service wants to rely solely on somebody external to themselves. Right. So as you know, Admiral Stamatopoulos, previous NAVSUP commander, made a big point in making sure that NAVSUP was looking out for their own capabilities and requirements. So a lot of back and forth between DLA's capabilities and the service. So I would ask Jason too, kind of to lean in on that perspective.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think looking at the adequate capacity, as you talked about, sir, I would think that we talk a lot about demands. And looking at the demand on the industry, but demands that come in that we need to be adequately ready to go with. I think DLA, we focus a lot on delivery and quality, but I can say that internally we've been doing a lot of work lately on looking at that capacity piece, but demands have been really the focus. I would also say too that we started doing what we're calling the Global Resiliency Initiative in its infancy right now, but we're looking at how we can look at things forward-looking, like what do we need for Indo-PACOM or in EUCOM to generate those investments and items required now to get to that capacity that we need. So again, that goes back to, well, what is the demand that we need to have for those particular theaters, and then how do you sustain that with the forward of deploying parts? So those are two big things that we kind of look at as far as DLA is concerned. Over.
Okay, anyone else before I ask a kind of follow-up? Because you bring up a great point. What's the requirement? We always look to that, right? We tend to, these days, kind of myopically look at one theater, right? The Pacific is our pacing threat. That's where most of our resources and our actions are going to be. But I don't see all the resources going there because our government isn't putting their resources towards that. They're putting resources, but I don't know that everything is connected where if you're connecting the dots. And so I think, in the future operating space, it's going to be globally interconnected. So the resources are going to be much tighter and more strained, right? And so our ability to have the resiliency you talked about globally based on how adversaries are presenting challenges and creating dilemmas for us, those vulnerabilities or dilemmas as we call them. So if you consider that dynamic nature of the defense supply chain and you talk about resiliency, you know, how resilient do we think defense supply chains can be, not just coming from the strategic support area from the United States, but really across allies and partners to do the redistribution that's required for anyone. So Jason, you could start with that at DLA because you work closely with US Transcom and your ability to project sustainment anywhere in the world and provide it continuously has become a bit diminished, I would think. So you got to start there, and then maybe we can talk from innovation and NAVSUP, and then Chief down at the tactical level. Think about that a little bit, and then come back to you, Eric.
Okay, great. Well, I think I think we're going to talk about the regional sustainment framework, and I know it's something that OSD has come out with. We had heard about that at the beginning of the conference with the Honorable Lohman's discussion on the regional sustainment framework, but that's something that DLA is taking particular interest in and looking at how we can work on the regionalization and the prioritization of that, looking at being involved in setting the theater. We talk about that a lot here. Also, a big component of that is our DLA regional commands across the globe, looking at how we can prevail in that contested logistics environment. If you look at the industrial base integration, I think from a DLA standpoint, very much integrated there. I know we look at the organic industrial base as a huge source. I know that we're in talks about looking at that as an actual supply source instead of just internally. So that, and then the second thing, or the third one I'll bring up is that strategic partnership alignment and looking at the regional partnerships, getting back to those regional commands where we had our allies and partner discussions involved with Five Eyes, the AUSCUS that met not too many months ago in Australia, and then looking at our terms of reference that we have with the UK, which is what we just started doing and signed for in February. But that is that direct link and looking at how we can be better into the allies and partners to sustain the supply chain for the future, but then also looking at that regional piece to make sure that we're ready for that resiliency that you were mentioning. Over.
Okay.
I would add from my seat, see resilience obviously as wide networks and inefficiency in reality what you need to have for resiliency. So having those forward deployed, forward positioned capabilities. So NAVSUP's been doing a lot of, we've talked data analysis a lot over the last couple of days, a lot of data analysis to really understand what are the parts that are your top parts for replacement and repairs, and also the ones that we anticipate through that CBM plus type mentality of we expect it to go out at a certain point in time to really understand what we've got to have where we for each platform, and then get it forward deployed load list is something new that they've been working on to get it out on the ship or very closely aligned at a CLF, combat fleet logistics capability out there. To get those things out there forward place. So that's a lot of the effort that I've seen taking place at NAVSUP.
I'll comment on two things. First of which, a lot of this is a big math problem. It's a time distance equation. And just speaking from my experience on the advanced manufacturing side, there may be instances on some of these legacy platforms where it doesn't make sense for a commercial vendor to spool back up tooling and manufacturing to produce that part. So we're going to have to go to alternate means. And in a wartime effort, I may not have the time to wait a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it may take in order to have DHL ship it back over to me, if I can get somebody to make it. And so this is where we've seen a niche of advanced manufacturing really start to come into play when you have these capabilities regionally placed to shorten that time distance equation and having the right equipment and skill sets in place in order to be able to produce these things additively and finish them off. So I think that's a really a crucial thing and something that hasn't been available in the past for a global type fight. The second piece, and you commented on this earlier, is the reserves. And so just for edification of everybody in the room here, if you're not familiar with the Marine Innovation Unit, it was a unit that was stood up about 2 years ago of reservists, folks that work out in industry at, you know, all your big name companies that you've heard of before. So instead of sending them back on the weekends and 2 weeks a year to do their occupational specialty, let's take advantage of all those technical skill sets that they have to help us innovate faster. And so what's unique about the unit is not only do they understand best practices on the military side, but they understand best practices on the commercial side. And then you can pick and choose which is the best solution going forward. So that's where we've sort of carved out a little niche for the Marine Corps and be able to add value back to them. But I think it's one of the highly underutilized things across the Joint Force is that reserve component.
Absolutely. Chief or Eric or?
So coming from the tactical standpoint, we have to train as if we have no support, and we have to plan as if we have no support. I was in Okinawa from 18 to 21, and then a lot of that first and second island chain mission shifted to 1MEF as I transitioned to 1MEF from 21 until now. And every time we got ready to go out, it's okay, cool. What I have is what I have, and nobody's coming.
So true expeditionary.
Yes.
So we're projecting forward into an austere, hostile environment. We have to sustain ourselves. But I would submit, and you know, I saw this as a senior mentor for the Mission Command Training Exercise Program that I work for the Army. We did the joint forcible entry into an island off the coast of China that will remain nameless. But you know, we treated it as if it was Iraq or Afghanistan, where there was absolutely no capability, right? But we know across the Pacific there are hubs of technical industrial capacity. And so, you know, I did some work when I went into Ukraine. I've had 2 trips in there, kind of worked my way from Kyiv all the way back, looking at depots and arsenals and some things because they were an industrial powerhouse. You know, they will work with us to a degree. They still have some pride. They don't want to be told what to do, even though they're getting a lot of equipment, and they've actually shown us a lot of things as we work telemaintenance technologies and things like that with the regional maintenance and distribution side. But I did some work for Secretary Lohman on mapping the industrial footprint across Lithuania, Poland, Romania. Who's there in terms of industry? Who's there in terms of capacity in former Soviet or Eastern capacity for heavy industrial manufacturing? Have we done that in the Pacific? Have we done it with partners? So what we've talked about here, I would submit, is a regional sustainment framework that is kind of self-licking ice cream cone, right? It's about us and our organic industrial base. And it's expanding with some amendment language that Senator Kelly and Romney put forward for prototyping and manufacturing for contested logistics that went into this NDAA is being worked, you know, to try and get across Five Eye nations, those partners aligned. But you've got to share, you've got to map it, you've got to understand sharing and intellectual property and how do we best do that. So you got to have the data. You got to have the analysis. You almost have to go in and build a digital twin of that ecosystem. There's plenty of data out there. Are we doing anything like that? And Jason, that question goes out to all of us here. Just some thoughts.
So I can tell you on the Marine Corps side, we absolutely are. We've reached out to industry vendors for AM material and said, okay, cool, who have you sold to? And then started cold calling them.
Now, when you say AM, you're talking about not the morning time, but you're talking about additive manufacturing or advanced manufacturing?
Yes. So advanced manufacturing, Philips, HP, like the big people making machines, right? Mm-hmm. So reached out to them and they're aggressively pursuing where are these capabilities. We did it initially in Australia and it's continued to push out. And then we had, actually myself and Lieutenant Colonel Radigan had a meeting a couple weeks ago with the OSD folks up at IBAS to talk about the industrial base. And that was one of the asks that came out of that was, hey, we need the OSD staff to go find those answers and network it. So it's definitely been identified and we've been working it, but it's a difficult thing to do with us.
Okay.
It's probably not that difficult, but we're Marines.
Well, we're mapping it. It's a start. Yes. Now we have to get that knowledge back and connect it to the diplomatic piece, the informational element of national power, the economic, right? And then we have to get that into the hands of policymakers, right, to think about. And so I'd say then we have to exercise it. Are we doing those things? And how could we do it? And what do we think? I mean, it's about building a more resilient supply chain based on great initiatives like regional sustainment framework with allies and partners who have capacity and capability, right? And they're gonna worry, will it be enough, right? So, and a lot of times we wanna kind of put a burden on them with foreign military sales, and we wanna kind of sell them things, and we want them to kind of rearm in the face, and we'll be there to help, but we're not always there. They can bring capability and capacity to bear if we're partnering with them truly, and we're sharing as we should. And so those are things we've got to struggle with. How are we looking at that? That's from an innovation standpoint. That's not a technology I'm bringing in innovation. It's about different way of thinking and engaging and educating, leading up the chain of command this side, and then driving better policy.
You know, we do this every time we pull into port. We get food and water and fuel from them. So it's not a huge stretch to think we can also pull manufacturing from them. So it does require a little effort on our part ahead of time to build up those relationships, map out where those capabilities are, understand if they have the right talent and skill sets and equipment standards. But it's an easy jump to get to that point. And we've already done that on I would say a very small scale. So far, reaching out to our commercial partners when we have opportunities come up here domestically. So I think it will be absolutely vital as we push our power forward to be able to understand where all those capabilities are.
Great.
Are you tracking the Avengers Initiative? Do you remember that discussion? So I didn't name it, so don't come at me. But the AMST, the Marine Corps AM Program Office, is doing what's called the Avengers Initiative, and they're identifying a metal component that they need, sending it out to industry internationally, not just here in the States, and saying, hey, I need it on this island, who can get it here first? So they basically created a race to say, let's see who can really reach out and touch us. So.
Right.
I think one area where I'm seeing at NAVSUP that, and just starting off right now and a lot of room to grow is within the AUKUS program. The effort in terms of getting subs into the hands of Australians. Right now it's planned for U.S. subs to go over there and then buy some U.S. subs and then eventually build their own. So as you know, U.S. and Great Britain are working with the Australians to figure out their eventual platforms, you know, that vendor base will present itself and grow in Australia going forward. So I think it's an opportunity to develop that over there in that location that I'm looking forward to seeing. Mm-hmm.
So I might offer and go back to this reservist piece, right? So those reservists that we have are brilliant people because they work day jobs, and a lot of them are technical experts in various fields. And the Army, National Guard, State Partnership Program, as well as others, you know, has a lot of influence, and they've built a lot of long, consistent relationships over time that have built trust. They can get heads of governments for the state partnership to do things that often DOD senior leaders can't do, or the administration can't do. So I think, you know, as we look at training with industry and bringing those things beyond the initial regional sustainment footprint for pilot projects that work just for our capabilities, that's another way that we've got to start saying, hey, can you use your 2-week annual training time to work with that country in an industry? Are we sending people to universities there? Are we having them train with industry there to try and help map some of this, understand, build the trusted relationships, as well as understand some of the information, intellectual property sharing? Thoughts?
Yeah, this is absolutely happening, at least in the Marine Innovation Unit. The traditional model on the reserve side says, my unit's gonna get together for 2 weeks, we're gonna go all out and do the same thing together, where at least right now the innovations model is you're gonna task organize and go work on a project for 2 weeks. So it's not necessarily getting the entire unit together in one specific location, but it's very much a management consulting. Let me pull these 2 skill sets that I need. The customer you need to work with is this, and this is what you're gonna work on for 2 weeks. So it's a better way to leverage leverage that without having a lot of the admin overhead during that period. So that's been a very successful model for us.
Okay, anyone else? Well, I'd like to follow up and say, you know, it kind of speaks to where we said we needed to go in the beginning, which is we style ourselves as an arsenal of democracy, but really haven't been that since World War II, and we're not going back to that, right? From an industrial base, a supply chain, or a distribution capability. So it's kind of got to be global, and we kind of have to say, what does a new arsenal of democracy look like? You know, and how do we create maneuver space? We've talked about that. Is logistics or the sustainment function really doing the maneuver to set conditions that drives op plans and con plans, which then drive, you know, execution of operations, right? So we have really taken what General Berger has said and kind of flipped it on its head, right? And so I would say that makes it a much more complex and truly expeditionary environment. So how do we kind of adapt our operational TTPs to ensure we have the comprehensive readiness and adaptability? I think that's something that involves training, it involves policy, it involves culture. So I would ask, how is industry handling that, Eric?
Well, taking a quick step back before getting into that, 100% agree that we aren't going back, right, when it comes to being an industrial powerhouse, when it comes to doing that manufacturing here. But that doesn't mean that in the future we aren't that in a little bit of a different light. And I think that's where industry is going or needs to go. And that is primarily or partially supported by advanced manufacturing. When I say advanced manufacturing, I mean it in the broad sense here. But additive being a big key part of that. Because at the end of the day, what we are looking at is really digital supply chain, digital distribution, digital manufacturing. How do we reduce that barrier between engineer and warfighter in the field? How do we enable us to keep a repository of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of parts for the next 50 years so we can actually reasonably maintain the programs that we want to be able to use or be able to modify and adapt them. Right now, there's no incentive for industry to do that at scale. And you can see that by the fact that you've got Marines reverse engineering parts that don't have OEMs, or the OEMs don't exist, or they don't care about it anymore. If you've got, look at the DMDV, Digital Manufacturing Data Vault, of all the 3D printed approved parts, many of those parts, all of those parts, to a certain extent, the approved ones, are parts that the IP, the companies don't care about, and are zero risk, as in there's no chance of this part hurting somebody. How many parts do you think there are actually that fall into that classification? Not a whole lot out of the entire supply chain, especially not a whole lot when you think about how many different parts can be manufactured by the technologies that are rolling out today and rolling out every day. The reason for that is the OEMs don't really have a reason to digitize their inventories and provide them to the Marines, because there isn't really systems on the technology side set up that help them make it worth their dollar. And unfortunately, at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to, is making it so that there is a system in place that incentivizes and enables a transaction, a bridge here, right? At the end of the day, that makes it so the existing primes, because that's who we have at the moment, the 5, plus hopefully some more that are up and coming. But when it comes to the future of supply and enabling a digital aspect of the supply chain, it's going to come down to, in the industry side, us putting in place systems, processes, business models that incentivize the players that are already there to want to play ball. Because I don't think the DMDV doesn't scale to full mature scale through Marines or reverse engineering parts. It scales to full scale by having OEMs coming in and providing their parts in which they already have 3D files. They already have engineers that can come in and do the work. and do it on a recurrent basis. Because one of the things we haven't talked about is, of all the parts that are on the DMDV, those are for existing suite of 3D printers that will be obsolete or are already obsolete tomorrow. And so we need a system in place that allows us to move at the speed of innovation and allows the digital supply chain to grow, and not just we spend $100 million digitizing every part for these certain 3D printers, and in 5 years, we can't buy those 3D printers anymore.
Let me offer a little additional perspective on this. So we've heard a lot this week about think differently, think differently, think differently. I'm going to encourage you to execute differently and take it a step further and stop talking about it and go out and execute. And we had an opportunity, I say we, the Naval Postgraduate School had an opportunity recently to participate in the exercise Trident Warrior. If you're not familiar with that, that's the experimentation arm that lives under Rim of the Pacific. And so huge multinational exercise that's out there. And so the Camry team put together, we called it a Joint Advanced Manufacturing Cell, JMC. We put together this team of people, a network of printers across the country in order to be able to go out and produce things that actually matter. And so, yes, this repository exists, but we also have a policy that's very permissive for us. And it allows us to go out and produce parts that actually do matter, and in some cases are hypercritical. And this was apparent during the exercise itself when we embarked some folks at joint team. So we had Army, Navy, and Marines all on ship together with their own individual critical skill sets. And sure enough, a CAS rep happened right there on one of the LPDs. And so this was for a water system. One was already broken, a second one broke, now they were down to a single water system. Obviously, water is very important when you're deployed. And so when you're down to that single system, you start to ration water right away. And so the team got together very, very quickly, assembled it, reverse engineered it, used polymer printers to form, fit, and function check, and then printed it in stainless steel, machined it, and the ship's captain said, looks great. Chief engineer said, looks great, install it. So it was a combination of having the right skill sets in place and leveraging the existing policy that was there that says, you know what, you can't accept that. You've done your due diligence, and we need this. This is a hypercritical part for the ship. Go out and execute. Now think about what's the risk here. Well, the risk is if I don't repair this thing, I'm terminating the exercise early. I've got to get people off of the ship so that they can get water. And so there's a real critical factor of having this massive asset to the force that's inoperable because of a single little water pump. So we're starting to see a lot more use of advanced manufacturing to produce things that matter. And the more and more times that we get to do this, the more and more comfortable program offices feel and understand the capabilities that are out there. But because we were there, because we brought the right talent sets in place, because we leveraged all the other joint players that were there and the joint equipment that was there, we were able to go ahead and produce a result that actually mattered. So just one case study there to execute differently.
So I've got one quick thought. I wasn't going to talk technical data because I could dive into this for hours, but your point of we have to do something, I was talking with L3 almost a year ago now about a licensing for their technical data. So they build their repository, we reach in and touch it, and I give them $5 every time I pull a file and produce something. Zero cost to them. Like, you don't have to do anything, just let me buy that technical data.
Yep.
So there was some interest. Unfortunately, that guy transitioned out, but we've taken it to Caterpillar. Depending on who you talk to, sometimes there's interest, but Caterpillar was like, yeah, you don't have a supply problem, we're not gonna talk about this. So that is the future of acquisitions.
There you go.
When? I don't know.
Okay, so I'd like to go ahead and open up the floor for questions, kind of interactive, and get your thoughts. I would ask and challenge industry, how are you executing differently? And how many industry folks are in the reserves? Yes, sir.
Good morning, Chief Warrant Officer Moore, currently sitting in NAVSUP Ammo World. A question from us in the Marine Corps or DoD writ large, active duty looking out, and then industry looking in. How can we get away from the just-in-time model? Right, we use that from industry, and for you to do just-in-time for us, we have to define a requirement. We define requirements differently for acquisitions than we do requisitions. So that changes from whichever level of war you're sitting in. But on our side, on the active duty side, we also kind of do our planning modeling as just-in-time, right? But how, with that, we're trying to be locally responsive, but globally aware. So still hanging on that just-in-time piece. What do you think we can do to get away from that to better prepare to have parts for 50 years? Thanks.
I'll open it up to anyone.
We've got a little bit different mission requirement than maybe commercial does, and a lot of times just-in-time delivery is still really helpful because I have limited assets to move things around. So I can't do that. I can't pre-position everywhere. I just don't have the funds to be able to do it. But the difference is, in some cases, I do need to hedge my bets, and I do need to pre-position things in appropriate places based on past experiences. So in Michael's opinion, it's probably somewhere of a hybrid model between just-in-time delivery and hedging my bets in certain locations.
So I think it's always going to be a balance. There can never be one or the other, right? So, but we do have some technologies that we're beginning to leverage, and I'm working a project with our 3rd Armored Corps, looking at the heavy force at NTC, right? So they're consuming readiness at an incredible rate, but they're building their authorized stockage lists for deployment based on what they did at home station. That's not the same at what they do in the same environment at NTC, which is a different environment than Fort Hood. They're both desert-like, but the missions and the op tempo are different than the home station training. And then when they build their castle out of the NTC to maintain readiness going to Europe to Defender, they're in a different environment, doing different mission set and consuming more readiness. So you can see the issue, right? So it's a combination of, hey, how do I get better precision and predictive? They're using some AI tools which have done some scenario-based planning on exactly the mission sets and the parameters inside of that, built a digital ecosystem, a digital twin ecosystem, so they can say, hey, you thought this was the right castle set or the authorized stockage list. That's not. And working here, you can have this advanced manufacturing capability available to you. You'll have this inside your own formation. You'll have this amount. You'll have these parts. In fact, these systems are going to go down at these times, and it kind of updates you every day with some confidence scores on predictive analytics and what are those drivers, so you can begin to kind of balance that out. So, as an example. Yes, sir.
Is it on? Okay.
It's on.
I think there's a pause there. So AJ Manuel from RTX, industry partner, retired Marine. I think we talked about vulnerabilities in this relationship. I think one of the biggest vulnerabilities that we really didn't address are our own policies. And I'll give you an example. We have been trying to lean into regional sustainment framework, working with our companies in Australia, Singapore, et cetera. And when we did a tabletop exercise and we tried to ship a part in theater to a site using the DLA distribution system, DLA's policy is they will not pay for it unless you send it all the way back to the US to get DD-250 there, then send it back to the country that you had it repaired. And then there wasn't enough DCMA folks in theater because they only come around once a week if they're available. So when you think about establishing regional sustainment framework, and you're doing that in Asia Pac or wherever, and you think about global trade policies, ITAR policies, we're cataloging all of the constraints regarding global trade policies, distribution policies that really hamper not just the industry partner, but all of us. When you say, hey, I'm not gonna pay for that transportation unless you send it back and receive it in the US, and then send it back to Australia where you had it repaired, where it's needed, those are things I think we need to attack. All the other stuff may take us a while and a lot of investment, but challenging our policies, looking at our DCMA footprint, because we desperately need those folks on the ground to approve those repairs. I think that's where we need to probably lean into as a logistics community.
Or we may not need them on the ground. We may just need to be able to connect to them. Yes, sir.
So just for context. So I'm the Australian on the other side of the conversation. So deeply involved in the MRO program. So if anyone isn't aware, so the MRO playbook was released by OSD Product Support last week. Yep. So if you need to find out what the process is or anything like that, it's readily available. Jump on the system and pull it down and have a read through. The issue that you've just highlighted, we're aware of it, and I don't know whether the DLA colleague wants to talk to it, but there's actually it's actually worse than what you've just described.
That's right.
But they're aware of it, and they're actively looking to overturn that policy. So there's some key legislative limitations to where we can repair and store things, particularly when you start talking about FMS. So we're alive to it, but I would commend everyone just to have a look at the MRO playbook because it'll provide some context to the practical application of the regional sustainment framework.
Thanks, Paul. I was going to ask Jason to highlight that because I talked to Honorable Oman last week about it and said, hey, so I think it's important, but it also has to tie back into things like the contested logistics amended language that says it's not just about getting things out there, but it's about policy changes. Jason, we want to talk and address that comment from Chief Manuel that he just brought up.
No, well, if you could restate this, the question, it was kind of muddled for me. If you could restate the question, I can answer. I think I want to get after the regional sustainment framework and the global resiliency initiative, but I want to make sure I answer it correctly.
It's about policy change that says a part doesn't have to be, third-party transportation back to the United States receipted in order to get it back out. It's kind of like Jones Act. I got to ship fuel overseas to ship it back.
Okay, copy. Yeah, so I would say that we are actually looking at that current policy. Really in this global resiliency initiative discussion, we actually had a conversation yesterday on how do we blend that into the other campaign plans that we have in the different theaters to where we can actually have that, repository or resilient supply chain in the Indo-PACOM, EUCOM is what I discussed earlier, which is what we've been focused on, but to make sure that we can do that, but then also utilizing the regional sustainment framework and having that close relationship with our allies and partners in the theaters to where we can do those repairs, we can do those orders in the theater versus having to bring it back to the United States. I think one area that we've been very focused on since I got here just 4 months ago is the terms of reference with the UK. And one particular thing that we talked about in that discussion is contested logistics. And how do we take the opportunities with the regional sustainment framework to be able to do that? When you look at maintenance repair operations, existing contracts that are already in the theater or whatnot. So we're looking at that, not just in the UK, but also with the UCOM itself, et cetera. So I think there's a lot of efforts going on in the background to look at that because I think the idea of just-in-time supply chain just isn't going to work anymore. And so how do we adapt to that, to the change that we need it to be? Over.
Right. So, the Australian liaison officer to the J4 here, Colonel, just told us about the playbook, and I knew that was out there. It, I think, approved last week, or it's in, yeah. So I would ask the team here at the Association of Marine Corps Logisticians, maybe pull that down, put it on your website to make it accessible to all the players. But it was really about, we can get parts. It's just the length of time having to, under the current policy, send it back to the states for receipt and then back out to the theater. So I think there's better ways we can do that. That I know that piece is being worked. We talked about it a couple of times with Secretary Lohman. I know he's big on that, and so I think that'll address that piece. I think we got about 2 minutes. So I would we got about 5 minutes. So I'd ask each of my panelists. Jason, we'll start with you. Provide some closing comment. And then we'll go down, Michael and Eric, Chief.
All right, great. Well, I just want to say thanks for the opportunity today. I know I was remote. It's great to be able to hear the conversation and the questions. So I think that this is an interesting or an intriguing topic that I am in conversations with almost every day now here in the position I am in DLA when it talks to integrated deterrence, or you talk about the regional sustainment framework, but also to look at those vulnerabilities to make sure that we are focused on the vulnerabilities that I brought up at the beginning from a DLA standpoint. So just really, really appreciate the opportunity today. Over.
Okay. Michael.
I think throughout this week, I've had a lot of folks come up to me and ask me about how do I get this thing in, or how do I do this thing on innovation? And I will tell you that logisticians are probably best positioned to be innovators just by their inherent nature of being resourceful. And so innovation is nothing more than being resourceful. You've got a great idea, well, go find ways out there to get it executed and implemented. So I encourage you just to keep executing differently, use your inherent abilities to be resourceful, and bring these innovations out to the fleet. They're needed.
Not too much from my end. I would say just, we're a naval force as a Marine Corps naval force, so make sure we're thinking about and tying ourselves into what the Navy is doing as well. Don't lean back into the OEF, OIF. Hey, we're more of a ground capability. We're maritime soldiers from the sea, so keeping those relationships, and again, as was discussed earlier this week, it's all about relationships and trying to reach out and network. So keeping those things tied tight across the board. That's it.
I would just say that none of these answers or none of the problems that we face today are solely answered either by policy or innovation. And it's going to come down to being a more flexible force that is more willing to adapt and try new things, even at the ground level. It's one of the things that we've been very lucky to be able to experience alongside Marines on a day-to-day basis, and work with groups that are just willing to say, hey, yeah, I'll try that. Doesn't take a whole lot of investment to try a new thing, try either a new strategy or try a new technology, see what works, what doesn't, and provide that as feedback. And that feedback is worth its weight in gold when it comes to industry. And when it comes to developing that future policy will enable innovation to have a more day-to-day application against the problems that we face today. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. I'm just kidding. So I would ask that all of you, we keep talking about thinking differently and doing differently. Leverage your supplemental sources of supply, whether it's industry or your local AM shop or whatever it is. Go find it and make them work for you. I've been running the program for almost 6 years now, and I have to go find customers everywhere I'm at. And we have the premier capabilities in the DoD, the premier Marines, the premier people doing it in the DoD, and I have to go find customers. Always. So leverage your people, leverage this technology, leverage this capability. If you're unsure about it, come hang out. Find me on the GAL, find me on LinkedIn. I'll talk you through it, and you will leave within a couple hours far more confident and capable than when you first came in. So think differently. If you can't, come find us, we'll help you. But leverage your capabilities in your local area. That's the only way we're all gonna get better at this, so.
Thanks, Chief, and thanks to each and every one of you. I appreciate, all of us appreciate your time and insights, your questions, your critical thinking, and what you do every day. We hope this panel was helpful and kind of framing and thinking about things. And as we said, we challenge you not only to think differently and more critically, but to execute a little bit differently and to continue to build relationships. And most importantly, right, we have to think beyond our instrument of national power in the military and really kind of educate up the chain of command and across the chain of command to people that we're not always comfortable engaging with, right? Well, that's industry. I can't really get too close because of the FAR, or that's the diplomats piece. I can't really do that, right? No. It was little groups of paratroopers that won World War II, right? I say that facetiously because I am one, but moving about the battle space. They formed ad hoc units after Normandy, after the drop, because they weren't with their units, right? And they, just like the Marines moving across, and the Marines and the Army doing amphibious operations together, right? It was that kind of dedication and relentless working together to overcome obstacles that allowed them to then work well beyond their own perceived limitations. So I encourage you to do that. Thank you so much. Thank you. I hope that was okay. Absolutely.
Appreciate you.
Thank you, General, for the panel and panelists. Great takeaway. Stop design thinking, start design doing, execute, execute. Appreciate you, Lieutenant Colonel Radigan, on that note. I'm going to take that and write it down and get after it. Please be back in 10 minutes, about 25 after, for the closing keynote with the Major General, so that way we can continue to have a conversation around this topic.